I don't understand the feed, yeah. And I told you I don't understand the treat, yeah. Run a check, cut and book, I'm in the field, yeah. All my bogeys catching heat, I'm with the ski, yeah. I done told you I don't understand the feed, yeah. And I told you I don't understand the treat, yeah.
Welcome. So welcome back to another episode of the Wesley James Show. I am streaming through Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, and through Twitter Periscope. So if you've never seen me before, I suggest you reach out to your favorite channel, wherever that is, and find me, like me, and subscribe. Only if you like what you see. So tonight what I'm going to talk about is incentive structures. It's a kind of a stupid term, a big term. Basically, the question is, how do people become incentivized to do certain things? So, like, for example, why, an easy one, why do we eat? Well, obviously because we're hungry. So the incentive of putting food in our mouths is so the hunger pains go away. So there's there's incentive structure in every single thing that we do, whether it's business, personal, spiritual, no matter what it is, there's always some sort of an incentive structure behind it. And when we understand what the incentive structures are, then we can kind of understand how people are making their decisions. And the reason why I'm making a video about incentive structures is because right now there's quite a large volume of people out there talking about conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. And hey, I love a good conspiracy theory. I entertain them myself. One thing that you'll learn about me is I don't come down hard on one side of the equation or the other. I tend to say, well, I haven't made up my mind yet, or I'm not so sure about that guy, or maybe we should look more into it. So you could approach me with some kind of like outlandish opinion, some sort of crazy thing, and I'd be like, oh, it's an interesting perspective. It's another word that you'll hear me say a lot as perspective, because everybody's got a different perspective. So anyways, given the COVID-19 coronavirus things and how the government is really kind of interjecting itself into an individual's risk assessment, there's a large volume of voices out there, people talking about conspiracy theories, and hey, there could or could not be a large cabal, a large cadre of people out there who are sitting in, some back room somewhere, smoky, low light, smoking up the place, talking about what their next move is going to be. And although, like I said, I'll entertain that idea. I think it's great. I think that it's a little easier to swallow if we talk about things that are kind of real world. So enough of me sitting here talking. Let's get into it. I want to talk about the incentive structure behind the media. So right off the bat, you can see that there is an article that's posted up here. This is an article from last year, actually, I think June of 2019, from Reuters. And I didn't go through and like pick out individual things about this article. I just, in an overall general sense, how does the media get paid? And so the first article comes up, and it's about how the media's got a big problem because who will pay for the news? Remember, originally back in old school, when we talk about mainstream media, we talk about Fox, CNN, MSNBC, NBC News, CBS, ABC. And typically, at least in my childhood, you could have found these these people on 5 different channels, and if you didn't have a cable subscription, you could just put bunny ears on the back of your TV, and you could get these channels. And that's because prior to the internet, there was no other way to access it, right? And so what these companies were doing is they were all fighting over market share or number of eyeballs, right? They're all trying to get our eyeballs focused in on their media content so that way when they go to commercial break, their partners can sell you a product or potentially sell you a product. And if anybody out there disputes that commercials don't actually translate to sales, I would turn to how much money is spent during the Super Bowl, which is arguably the biggest sporting event, largest number of eyeballs at any given time on the Super Bowl. And so companies spend millions and millions and millions of dollars for just 30-second spots. So it's obvious that a commercial can change somebody's mind, right? So the whole incentive structure behind the media in the beginning, when TV first rolled out and we had nightly news and commercials and that sort of thing, now they've not gone away, but what they were built upon in the past was just keeping you glued to your seat, and keeping you there interested, so that way when Hostess came on TV and tried to sell you some Twinkies, you would sit there and watch the Twinkies and wait for that episode to come back from commercial. That is the whole purpose. That's how they got paid. And those media partners like Hostess, for example, by the way, no affiliation, no bad energy, no good energy or anything to Hostess. That was just the first company that pulled out of my brain. But let's say, for an example, Hostess spends a certain amount of money and they're expecting a certain amount of viewers. So in the past, mainstream media used to get paid upon how many people they could attract, how many eyeballs they could attract to the TV. So fast forward now to the internet, where everybody's got access to everything, right? And so the question is now, how is media getting paid? What is their incentive? So let's get into this article. Out in London, news organizations are being challenged by technology giants and unsettled by a broader lack of trust, but they have much deeper problem. Most people don't want to pay for online news. And by the way, I don't want to pay for online news. So I'm the same way. I'm just kind of cheap, right? There's news at our fingertips. Swiftly accelerating mobile internet and smartphones have revolutionized the delivery of news and destroyed the business models of many news organizations over the past 20 years, leading to falling revenues, layoffs, and takeovers. Think about what Uber did to the taxi industry, and think about what Airbnb did to the hotel industry. Just kind of changed it, right? Just changed the landscape. It's exactly what the internet did to the news agencies of the past. The mass migration of advertising to U.S. technology giants such as Facebook, Google, and Amazon have hammered revenues, while more than half the world's population now has access to news via the internet connection. But will people actually pay for news? The Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism said in its annual digital news report that most people would not pay for an online news, and that there had only been a small increase in the proportion of people willing to do so in the last 6 years. Even among those who do pay, there is a subscription fatigue. Many are tired of being asked to pay for so many different subscriptions. And by the way, I'm the same, guys. Like, I've got a Netflix, an ESPN Plus. I got car insurance. I got a home mortgage. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff coming out of my account monthly. So when they talk about subscription fatigue, I can understand what they're talking about, and I think you do too. Many will opt for films or music rather than pay for news. Some media companies will fail. Much of the population is perfectly happy with the news that they can access for free, and even amongst those who are willing to pay, the majority are only willing to sign up for one subscription. And so, of course, what does that mean? That means that people are only getting one source of news, which is more than likely going to be slanted in one direction or the other, and so that's going to be dangerous. A lot of the public is really alienated from a lot of journalism that they see. They don't find it particularly trustworthy, and they don't find it particularly relevant, and they don't find it leaves them in a better place. While many news organizations add paywalls and some see increases in digital subscriptions, there has been little change in the proportion of people paying for online news, apart from the Trump bump rise in the U.S. back in 2016 and 2017. And the Trump bump is just a call out to when Trump came into office, people became interested in the news cycle, the 24-hour news cycle again. I've not done a bunch of research on that, so sorry, that's not an uneducated statement there. Don't beat me up too hard on it. In the United States, those paying for news online were likely to have a university degree and to be wealthy. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post did well on digital. And then still almost 40% of new digital subscriptions at the New York Times are for crosswords and cooking, the Reuters Institute said, and they were just citing an article by Vox at the time. In Britain, around a third of those surveyed said they avoided the news due to Brexit. Leave voters said they avoided the news as it made them sad and said they could not rely on the news being true. There has been no Brexit bounce. If news organizations want to cut through a direct route to users in an environment dominated by platforms, they want to convince people to pay for their journalism, then they must convince people that the journalism they publish has value for them and for the public. So this is what they're up against, right? This is what news organizations are up against. They're up against people, frankly, like myself, who are delivering you the news right now through a different platform than they're typically used to, right? So if you're seeing this, you're not logged in on your cable news subscription. So keep in mind that media needs likes, clicks, shares, and comments in order for their advertisers to pay them money. So for example, let's look on the right-hand side of this very screen. So you can see that this is a Reuters article, and you can see on the right-hand side, this is an article by, an advertisement by Goldman Sachs over here. Open a no penalty CD. And this is a very clear advertisement. And I'm assuming that the number of clicks and shares this article translates to some sort of payment from Goldman Sachs marketing department. So that is the incentive structure of the media now in today's age. And you can imagine how much news is coming out day in and day out, every second, every minute, every hour of the day. It's a 24-hour news cycle. It never stops. So people are bombarded with articles and videos, and it's just endless. So how do you get people to tune in? How do you get people's eyeballs? How do you get people to like something, to click it, to share it, to send it to each other through a text message? Well, it's gotta create some sort of like a visceral reaction. And a visceral reaction is something that's in your gut. You know, it's like deep down, it's an emotional reaction. And they do that by creating headlines. And now this headline is not the greatest as far as creating a visceral reaction, but it does have a curious question in it, right? Who will pay for the news? And if you've not considered that question before, it might cause pause and make you want to click on that article and read it. So that gives you an example of what the incentive structure is for the media to continue to deliver you news. Now, does remember that the headline is the attention getter. Does the headline need to be factual by any means? Does it need to be relevant to the content of the article? I don't know. And this is on you as the person who's going to be downloading articles or videos or consuming these things. It's on you, the viewer, to decide if the content in the post is matching the headline. What I'm finding these days is there's a lot of hyperbolic and a lot of salacious headlines out there to get people to click on stuff. And I see my friends click and share without reading articles, and sometimes even the content of the article looks like it coincides with the title of the article, but if you click into the actual details and the references of what they're citing, some of the stuff and a lot of the stuff, guys, frankly, is slanted. It really is badly slanted. But do you fault anybody? Does that mean that there is a conspiracy out there, a cabal, a team of people in a dark, smoky room that's like plotting to like sell you articles? No, it doesn't. It means that there's a lot of independent journalists out there, and there's a lot of corporations that are all fighting for your time. They're fighting for your eyeballs and your clicks. And this is the result of that. This is the result of that incentive structure. Okay, so let's move on. And we talked about media and how media is incentivized. So right now we're going to dig into clinical researchers and how they're incentivized. Because what I see a lot of times, I have friends of mine who will, cite an article or say something along the lines of, the leading experts or scientists agree that, you name it, blah blah blah. And my, last thing I want to do, and the whole reason I'm sharing a video like this is to let everybody know that I actually come from a place where I believe, in general, the average person has good intentions. I got to believe that. I got to believe that everybody around me and almost everybody that I interact with has good intentions, right? Now, the question is whether their good intentions are well intended for me or well intended for them, but that's besides the point. What I'm saying is that most people do have good intentions about the things that they decide to do. So when we get into an article like this that says former Cleveland Clinic researcher allegedly failed to disclose ties to China, I want you to remember that I don't think people wake up, and specifically this researcher, I don't think people wake up in the morning and go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sell some information to China, or I'm going to manipulate this. Like, no, I don't think people wake up in the morning and do that. So let's look at this article. A former Cleveland Clinic Foundation doctor was arrested Wednesday and appeared in court on Thursday on charges of wire fraud and making false claims to obtain millions in federal grant funding. In its latest move in a federal crackdown on alleged participants in China's Thousand Talents plan, the government believes the program may recruit U.S.-based scientists and researchers to steal intellectual property and scientific advances paid for with American funding. The FBI claims King, I probably pronounced it wrong, King Wang, a U.S. citizen born in China, lied to receive more than $3.6 million in grants from the National Institutes of Health, while also collecting money for the same research from the Chinese government. And then the special agent in charge goes on to say that this is not a special a case of simple omission. So I'm not going to go any further into that. You're welcome to go out there and find the article if you'd like to read it yourself. But I'm just pointing at something, and this is very recent. This article was just released on May 14th, and this is in regards to the coronavirus testing, I believe, or coronavirus something. I don't even know. Go look it up. Research it. It doesn't say anything about COVID-19 in this right now. Anyway, that is an example of an incentive structure. U.S. federal funding will fund research scientists for certain research, right? And it sounds like that there's other governments out there that do the same thing. And so, of course, this person is a human, and they're easily manipulated into, doing certain things for them and their families, which is making more money. So this is something that happened really, really recently. Let's look at something that happened a long time ago. This is an article by the University of California, San Francisco. And this is about sugar's sick secrets, how industry forces have manipulated science to downplay the harm. This is by Ann Kavanaugh. And I'm going to skip on down. You're welcome to go find this article if you like. I'm going to go skip on down to the section that says documents reveal scientific shenanigans. So what this is talking about is this looks like a doctor, Kearns, which is a dentist. She's a DDS, I think is a dentist, began an unlikely journey that would shed light on some of the forces that helped push us to this brink. Her foray, this break that they're talking about is the health crisis. The section prior had talked all about obesity and health crisis and all sorts of stuff. Her foray began years before she became an assistant professor at UCSF at a dental conference on the connection between gum disease and diabetes. One of the keynote speakers gave a seal of approval to Lipton Brisk, a sugar-laden tea. Aghast, Kearns chased him down and asked how he could possibly call sweetened tea healthy. And then he says, there is no evidence linking sugar to chronic disease. I was speechless, Kearns recalls. I literally had no words. After all, she had seen how sugary drinks damaged her patients' oral health. Some had cavities in every tooth, and she knew tooth decay was the leading chronic disease afflicting kids. So this goes on to talk about the Sugar Association. Back in 1943, they started up this Sugar Association, and it included members of Domino Sugar, Imperial Sugar, and some other sugar producers. And the whole purpose of this association was to essentially lobby and get federal approvals and FDA approvals and that sort of thing. And so if you keep going, the fruits of her label revealed the sugar industry's decades-long strategy to downplay sweeteners' potentially harmful health effects. She found strong evidence that the industry had manipulated science to protect its commercial interests, influence regulations, and shape public opinion. And the industry has disputed this assessment through public statements. I'm absolutely sure of it. But she actually ran a study, and it was published by the JAMA, Journal of American Medicine. And I opened it up. It's not, oops. Wow. How did it, let's do this. I'll open it this way. Hopefully it doesn't crash over here. I actually don't have access to the entire thing, but I know what it goes into. It goes into early warning signals of heart disease, the risk of sugar that emerged in the 1950s. It goes into a lot of things. And actually, sugar is really, really not good for us. But it's interesting that they pushed this whole narrative. So back in the mid-1960s, however, researchers had begun wondering whether sugar might be related to heart disease. The Sugar Research Foundation paid 3 Harvard scientists today's equivalent of $50,000 to review the existing research on sugar, fat, and heart disease. Their analysis, published in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine, minimized the link between sugar and heart health and promoted fat as the culprit instead. So, and Kurz goes on to say this was clearly a biased evaluation. And by the way, I'd just like to call out $50,000, guys, in today's money. Really? $50,000? That's all you got? That's ridiculous. Anyway, this is where all of that diet, the diet wave came from. You remember when we were all younger? I'm not sure of your age. I was born in the early 80s. When we were younger, it was all about diet this and diet that, and low fat this and low fat that, and all the while, sugar's just pounding Americans' health, and if you were to point to the scoreboard, which is what a lot of people do, you're going to point to research funded by the sugar industry that tries to tell you that the problem is high-fat diets, when actually it's high-fat diets and the combination of high-sugar diets. And actually, high-sugar diets just on their own. You don't even have to have a high-fat diet. You just have a high-sugar diet. Shit's not good for you. It just really is not. So, anyway, I was just giving you an example of research scientists who were paid money. Remember that everybody is incentivized by money, right? We're all trying to eat. We're all trying to, feed our kids or pay our mortgage or pay our car loans or whatever it is. So I can't fault somebody for taking some money to do something and produce a result, right? Ethically, morally, this doesn't look good. But like I said, I really don't believe that people wake up in the morning, especially these researchers woke up in the morning and were like, what we're going to do? We're really going to screw up the future of American health. Like, no, I just don't believe that. There are less nefarious reasons, for example, of $50,000. I just can't believe that number. Okay, so there you go. So we talked about the media incentive structure and how they get paid. We talked a little bit about a researcher recently who's all tied up with a law right now because of how he worked his incentive structure. Talked about sugar's sick secrets and the incentive structures with those research scientists back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about political incentive structure. So right now, here is an article out of the LA Times. Title is Newsom warns defiant counties that they could lose their coronavirus cash for reopening early. So there's a lot of talk out there about should we open, should we not open, and I think the right approach is to allow. Listen, I'm no expert. Okay, let me just get that out of the way. I am no expert at all on public policy and risk assessment. I am an expert on Wesley policy and Wesley risk assessment. Okay, so let me just get that out of the way. But if you gave me the keys of the castle and said, Wesley, you're king of California for the day, or you're king of the country for the day, I'd be like, hey, I actually don't know what I'm doing. I think the people, the municipalities that are closer to their populations would have better data and would be able to serve their populations better with their decision-making powers, as opposed to me creating some sort of a blanket policy that's supposed to be a one-size-fits-all policy for situations like this, and it just does not work. I live in Central California. It's a very rural area, and there's other places in California like Santa Clara County or like LA County, for example, where there are very dense populations. So a policy here wouldn't work there, and vice versa. So Governor Newsom in California is warning that counties, there's 3 counties in question, Yuba County, Sutter County, and Modoc County, are looking at opening early, and I think they already have opened early. And Governor Newsom's like, listen, you guys aren't going to get any money. So let's read it. Governor Gavin Newsom's administration sent a clear warning this week to rural counties defying his state's stay-at-home order to fight the spread of novel coronavirus. Keep it up, and you'll lose disaster funding. So the director of California's Governor Office of Emergency Services sent nearly identical letters dated May 7th to Yuba, Sutter, and Modoc counties, where local officials lifted restrictions and allowed gyms, restaurants, shopping malls, hair salons, and other businesses to open their doors again ahead of the state's plans. His name is Ghilarducci. Ghilarducci said disaster funding is predicated on jurisdictions needing help in extraordinary circumstances, and if the counties believe there's no emergency and choose to defy the governor's order, then they won't be able to prove they need such funds. So keep this in mind when you've got local municipalities. I don't care if it's a city, a county, or a state that is considering reopening. If they roll back with their emergency declarations, that means that they're not available. They're not eligible for the next level up disaster funding. That's the way it looks anyway. I don't know if that's true across the board, but that's the way it looks. So I have to assume that like a FEMA fund, the Federal Emergency Management Association, I'm not sure exactly what FEMA stands for, but that's the Federal Emergency Fund. I got to believe that FEMA is only able to spend money on things if there's an actual emergency, right? Like if there's not an emergency declaration, how could you provide emergency funds? So the incentive structure that I'm getting to right now is the incentive structure on staying closed. So keep in mind, when your local county, like mine, for example, is Tulare County here in Central California, when they're deciding to not open their county, it's not always about how they feel about what's happening. Sometimes it can be just as simple as the incentive structure, which happens to be money 99% of the time. If they open up, this governor is going to shut off funds, and these counties and cities have had no revenue or very little revenue in relation to what they're used to since this whole thing started. So that's what I wanted to get to. There it is. Here's your media incentive structure. Who's going to pay for it, right? Here are your research scientists incentive structures. Who pays for those? Those all come from federal funds. And if the research scientists don't find any data or don't find any research that's relevant to what the government is looking for, what are the chances that their funds get re-upped? What are the chances that they're allowed to reopen research on something else that the government is interested in? Imagine if you paid somebody, $10 to come out and find weeds in your yard, and they didn't find any weeds, right? You're like, well, that wasn't worth it, right? I guess that's not the best analogy, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like if somebody's going to pay me $10 million to, find a cure for this or find a cure for that, well, I'm going to be incentivized to do so. But if it's only a one-time payment, and this is, I'm going down the rabbit hole, but you can imagine, like, what happens if it's a one-time payment and then you don't have funding lined up, for next year, for example. Then what do you do? Well, you might want to lengthen out that research a little longer, wouldn't you? So keep in mind of incentive structures. And now I don't know if I taught you anything tonight on this video. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But now take this idea of the incentive structure and apply it to everything that you look at. It's not necessarily all a conspiracy. It could be. It could absolutely be a team of very rich and powerful people that are controlling our world. Who am I to say? I don't know. But I think what's more likely is that we have some really weird, well, not weird, they're well-intended incentive structures, right? They built them, to get people paid, right? And that's what's happening. You've got media that's putting forth salacious headlines. You've got research scientists that would like to get paid for the research that they're conducting, right? So they're either going to push a narrative or not push a narrative. Here's another article that I pulled up. That UK scientist that warned, 1 to 2 million deaths in America if we didn't lock down. This dude quit. Number one, he quit because he was allowing his girlfriend to come over and visit him. But this UK scientist, this guy was this infectious disease expert or epidemiologist at Imperial College, and he's the one that came out with all those predictions. Remember that scientists that create predictive modeling, they are gonna fail if they underpredict, right? If the Imperial College model came back and said, well, worldwide we're only gonna see 20 deaths, they're gonna fire that guy on the spot, right? Like, bro, there's like 300,000 deaths now. You said 20? That's crazy. Right. But if he overshoots it, right, if he's like, well, I think there's going to be 2 million deaths, and then there's only like 300,000 deaths, then they're like, well, we actually did a really good job. We were expecting 2 million. We got 300,000. Hey, good job. And they're going to pat that guy on the back. So keep in mind, incentive structures, this is what the world is built upon. This is how people make their decisions. And while we're on that topic, like this video. If you liked it, if you truly liked it, like it on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch, wherever you are. And if you liked it a lot, you might share it. And if you shared it and you liked it a lot, well, then you might think about subscribing to the channel wherever you're at. All right. Okay, guys, that's all I got for the evening. Incentive structures. I hope you like the branding that I've put out there and some of these intros, outros, and the music that we got going on. I hope y'all are are well out there. And yeah, I